Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Avorion episode 49. I'm Enigmius, and today the blueprint for the Serpovectem is available on the Steam Community Workshop. And we're just going to kind of show you a little bit about what the ship looks like in action. You can see here, this isn't intended to be representative of how the ship behaves in sort of balanced combat. This is actually in the system where we built the ship, which is the initial system that we started in. We just kind of set up building operations, and we've been working up the tiers in creative mode, the tiers of materials, and this is sort of where we ended up. But the way the game currently behaves is when you turn on invincibility for a ship, the next group of enemies that comes into the system will usually attack you, and when they discover that they can't destroy you, they move on. They go find something else to destroy. And then all of the ships apparently that warp in, basically they won't come over and attack you, which is nice. You can just build, and that's the whole point. The whole reason why I build in creative is so that I can just focus on the building without being attacked all the time. But what ended up happening is we had this very large accumulation of enemy ships in the system, so when we got close enough and we had invincibility turned off, this is what we ended up with, which is quite the hail of weapons fire. It's kind of fun. You can see though, my shields are just about to conk out, and the hull is going to be whittled away. We're eventually going to have to leave. But I don't want to be misleading and say that this is how you can expect the ship to behave when you're in the same area of the game where you can gather the materials that the ship is made out of. The ship is made entirely out of trinium components and hull armor, but we're in a system where we can only get iron, so that's kind of giving you the idea of the balance. We're going to move on to a more advanced system, get closer to the center of the galaxy throughout the course of the video, and sort of give you a better idea of how things work. But what I've discovered for this game is that in terms of the offensive capability of any given ship, it's very difficult to talk about what a new design is capable of, because it's based more on the systems that you have installed and the kinds of turrets that you have to place on the ship, which can vary pretty wildly from one person to the next. One person can have very basic weapons and systems, very limited number of turrets, and the turrets that they have aren't especially great. And then another person might have some really good systems and some really good turrets, and be able to mount a lot of turrets that are really good. And this ship behaves very, very differently in combat. So I'm not going to try and upsell the virtues of this ship's combat capabilities, except to say there's lots of room to add turrets if you have the systems and the turrets to make it possible. You just have to kind of discover that on your own. Basically, whatever you put into it is what you're going to get out of it in terms of the offensive capability. In terms of the defensive capability, it's got integrity field generators basically covering 99.9% of the ship. You might find a couple of spots where I wasn't able to get coverage because there wasn't a practical location to place a little field generator to cover that. Specifically in the elliptical section on the back of the ship, there's a couple of areas that I can think of off the top of my head that are missing the integrity field generator, but the overwhelming majority of the ship is covered, and you can see just how far we've gone since first arriving in the game and setting up our building operations. Now's the time to start moving towards the center of the galaxy so that we can gain access to the higher tier materials and test the ships against higher tier enemies. So it took a while. There was a lot of traveling that was involved. So we've got the integrity field generators. The shields also seem to have pretty reasonable coverage. Even you'll see when we get into some slightly more challenging combat scenarios, the shields still tend to hold up pretty well. This here where we're fighting is not necessarily, I don't think this is even close to the trinium systems yet, but it's definitely higher than where we were, and the shields are still holding up just fine. So it's a pretty robust little ship for the size that it is. When I was done building, when I finally said, okay, we're done, we've got all the systems in, we've got all the stuff on, it's ready to go, it was just over 23,000 blocks. And then I merged as many of the hull armor blocks as I possibly could, and it dropped down to around the 20,000 block mark. So it's, as block counts go, it's a little on the high end, but it's still not an especially large ship. What really sort of impressed me, just mucking about putting in the various different systems, is that we managed to get the maneuverability much higher than I expected. Everything is around the 1 rad per second mark. The roll is just below 1 rad per second, but pitch and yaw are both above. So it makes for a very maneuverable ship. We can spin around, we can do the things that we would like to do, and it's very responsive, I found. So if you wanted to take those numbers higher, make it even more maneuverable, there's still room on the interior of the ship that you can do that. But I was finding at the point where we got to around the 1 rad per second mark on each of those that it was, I wasn't getting as much out of the process of finding those little nooks and crannies to tuck more thrusters into as I was liking, so I just decided 1 is pretty good, and that's where we would leave it. The top speed, without any kind of limit removers or anything like that, systems to increase it, is just over 500 meters per second squared. That's not boosting. So in those situations where you need to either traverse a distance in a hurry or get out of a spot in a hurry, it's got the speed to do that. I find that it works pretty well. It works really, really well if you've got a limit remover, but as it sits without any systems whatsoever installed, it's still pretty reasonable in terms of the speed combined with the maneuverability. And the one thing that really stood out for me as not being as good as I would like it to be is the braking thrust. But given how fast you can spin around and jam the booster in the opposite direction, you can get by without it. It's one of those things, if you wanted better braking thrust, there's room inside the ship that you can add more thrusters to get that. But for my purposes, I just decided that I was okay with where it was. And, we have the option to slow down faster if we want. It's not that big of a deal. So overall, very happy with the way the ship turned out. I really like the way that it looks. Aesthetics kind of important for me when I'm going to spend this much time building a ship. So to have it turn out the way that it did, I was certainly pleased. But also the performance, and particularly the maneuverability and the speed, make it for a pretty fun ship to fly around in. There are certain things, if I were to do it all over, I would change. I would definitely put a little bit more time into the braking thrust. I don't know that I would necessarily put more consideration into getting the integrity fields and the shield hit points up. I think they're in a pretty good spot where they are. But it's one of those things where, based on the size of the ship and what we were trying to get out of it, I think it's pretty well balanced. So I would, if you are in any way interested, I would really encourage you to get the blueprints, build the ship in your game, and screw around in it for a little bit. Not necessarily the rest of your life. It doesn't require a commitment, but you can try it out and see what you think and modify it to suit your purposes, whatever you want to do. So that brings us to the ages-old question, what next? I've got 2 projects in mind. One is a carrier, the other is a station. And I haven't made a decision one way or the other which one we're going to do next, but whatever we do next, the other one will be the one that we do after. So we're going to be doing a carrier and a station for the next 2 projects. I just have to decide which one to go first. At this point, I'm leaning towards the station aspect because I like the idea of having a central location where I can start doing things a little less reliant on the creative aspect of the game. I'm still going to be building in creative mode, but I also like the idea of starting to build up a fleet and having a place where I can store that fleet and have it looked after without necessarily having to babysit it all the time. So the idea of having a station as a central location for that to happen, to me, is kind of an appealing sort of thing that I would be interested in setting up. But at the same time, wherever we set up the station, that's where the station is, and maybe it would be a good idea for us to advance a little bit farther towards the center of the galaxy. I specifically went on my little journey not just until we found Trinium, but also a little bit farther, so that we were starting to see Xanian. so that I could justify moving up to the next tier of materials and our little experiment. And then when we do the testing, we don't have to travel for so long or so far in order to be able to get to the spot where we're testing against ships that we're supposed to be fighting based on the material our ship is made out of. So we're in a good spot to start the next build. I'll decide, obviously, before we get to the next episode, what we're going to start on, and we're going to go from there. So if you want to be notified about the next and future episodes in this and other series, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.